Before I start, I'd like to just acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional land of the Susquehannock peoples. I acknowledge their continuous struggle and of systematic injustice through colonization, genocide, and marginalization. And I commit to joining present and future generations in their struggle for equity, recognition, and respect. Today's subject, as I said, is virtual content, logistics, and legalities. And Taylor, if you want to go to the housekeeping slide. So please introduce yourself in the chat. Just remember, anything shared in the chat will be visible to all panelists and attendees. Pre-submitted questions have been collected, so there's no need to resubmit them in the chat. For your questions, please submit those to the chat if you have them during the live session. If you have any technical issues or questions, please submit those to Taylor Talton in the Q&A part of the Zoom webinar. This webinar will be recorded and shared, and any resources mentioned today will be included in the follow-up. So thank you all again, and please enjoy the webinar. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lori Zierer, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Humanities Council.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lori Zierer. Thank you so much for joining us all today. At the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, we're so honored to co-host this webinar with the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. It's so timely as we all adjust to the realities that seem to shift every day of engaging our audiences in new ways. You know, the nuts and bolts of virtual content, it was important before the pandemic, but now we really have an opportunity to develop and fine-tune this crucial area of our work. To meet the emerging needs of our state, at the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, we had to get comfortable in this space in a very short amount of time, like all of you. We've worked with our amazing statewide partners to produce public webinars like this one, which have helped so many cultural organizations adapt and strengthen their networks. We've also launched 2 statewide emergency relief and recovery programs, PHC Cares and our pop-up grants for cultural producers. By combing through the applicant data, we've discovered hardship across the sector. There are budget losses, staffing cuts, particularly hourly staff, and our smallest nonprofits are getting hit the hardest. But we've also seen positive and inspiring trends. So many cultural organizations have turned this crisis into an opportunity to celebrate heritage and identity, build community and joy, create new virtual platforms, leverage assets like nature and place, and document our very real human stories. No doubt, we as a sector are resilient, creative, and strong, but we've got a lot of work ahead of us. That's why I'm excited about today, because this webinar is going to really help us think through how we are going to engage our audiences. So now let me introduce you to Carl Blischke, Director of the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. We're honored to be partnering on this webinar with you, Carl. Carl will talk more about what's coming up with the session. Thank you again.
Good morning, everyone. This is Carl Blischke, Executive Director of Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. I apologize, I am having some technological issues, so maybe it's a good thing I'm on this webinar. I can't share my video, but hopefully you can hear my voice. So I want to thank Pennsylvania Humanities Council very much, and in particular Lori and her staff for working with us on these webinars. It's just been a great privilege to work with you and share these resources. I will say that the Council on the Arts mission is to strengthen the cultural, educational, and economic vitality of Pennsylvania's communities through the arts. As we deal with these very challenging times for the creative sector, I think it's more important than ever that we act on our mission and support the needs of the creative sector. Certainly, this virus has accelerated digital strategies, certainly for the short term and potentially for the long term. And so I think the content of this is very timely and relevant. I want to thank expressly all of the guest presenters that we have on today. Thank you for your time and for your expertise. I know that it will be valuable for everyone attending. Some of you may have attended our first webinar in partnership with Humanities Council. That was on reopening safely. I will say that today's content is really about the issues around presenting digital content. If you do have specific questions around reopening, let's take those offline. In particular, I will say that our staff member, Sarah Merritt, has been taking a lead on our agency in providing resources and answers around reopening, and I know that she'd be happy to connect with you on any of those topics. So, without further ado, I think I'm turning it over to Dawn. Is that correct?
No, Sarah.
To Sarah.
Just back to me. Yep, back to me really quick. Just echoing what Carl just said, if you do have ideas, because we hope that the Humanities Council and the Council on the Arts can continue to provide these informative webinars for you. So any ideas that you have for future themes of webinars, we would love to hear what those are. So feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll collect those ideas as we consider the next event that we host. So just really quickly to overview the agenda, we have some really incredible experts joining us today. We have Aimee Aliquiva, Emmy Award-winning film director, photographer, and composer, council member, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and also the president and CEO of Your Mom's House, a production company in Pittsburgh. We have Adam Rigger, director of production for the Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts. We have Lanish Miller-White, executive director of Theater Philadelphia. We have Sandy Garfinkel, member of Eckert Siemens Attorneys at Law and Pittsburgh Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. Shane Valenzi, associate at Eckert Siemens Attorneys at Law and Pittsburgh Volunteers for the Arts. And then we have the wonderful Dawn Frisbee Byers, Senior Director of Content and Engagement for the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, moderating our Q&A session. You'll have an opportunity toward the end of the session. We'll be entertaining the live questions that you submit during the webinar, so we're looking forward to seeing what those are. And then I can't thank Taylor Talton enough from the Humanities Council for all of her work on our technology. This couldn't happen without her. So without further ado, I am going to turn the webinar over to Aimee Aliquiva.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's beautiful to be here. It's a little unfortunate, but also at the same time, adversity builds character. And what I want individuals to focus on at the beginning is the word mute. It seems with all these virtual, digital, gatherings and things of that nature, especially with Zoom, the number one phrase of 2020 is "you're on mute." Wherever you go, I'm surprised there's not a T-shirt that says "you're on mute." So when you think about allyship, I thought about that word a lot. And, as a digital creator, as a filmmaker, as a photographer and composer, I don't look at it as a title, but I look at filmmaking not as filmmaking, but as cinematic poetry. How can I tell stories in a very palpable way, in an artistic way that is easily digestible? So, of course, with the unfortunate happenings with so many Black men in America, and with the dissolve of George Floyd back in May, of course, the entire country just was flipped upside down. And that is partially due to the, you know, COVID-19 and individuals staying in the house and things of that nature. They have more time to absorb digital information and virtual information because they're in one place. And believe it or not, the more comfortable individuals are, the more likely they have the bandwidth to digest and download the content that you present to them. So I picked up my camera and I immediately started taking photos of protests. I was going out every other day, filming this protest, capturing photography, videography of these protests and things of that nature. But as I brought this material home, my daughter, who is 8 years old, noticed that there were no individuals that were represented, those with who were deaf, hard of hearing, or those with disabilities. And I began to scan through my work, and I noticed nothing was there that represented them. And the reason why it was so important to my 8-year-old daughter is because 2 years ago, when she was 6, I wanted to do an activity with my daughter in which both of us had a level playing field. I wasn't the father who had this superiority. She wasn't the daughter that had the inferiority. We started out on the same, and we chose ASL, American Sign Language. That proved to be transformative to our relationship, to my patience as a father, and to her learning the foundation of discovery. So when she didn't see individuals who were doing sign language, she said, "Dad, hey, what's up?" So I took to heart and I said, wow, you're absolutely right. So I wrote a one-page poem, or, you know, a script, and it was called Unspeakable. I immediately called my teacher, ASL teacher, and I asked her, I said, hey, listen, you know, I would like to create something called Unspeakable. And she said, okay, well, let me call my friends. Amy Crawford, Danielle Phillip, Greg Pollitt. Those were individuals in the accessibility arena. I called my team, Sydney Cooper, Jack Orman. I also called a composer for Disney, Butter Anderson, and also a writer for Disney, Bianca Atterbury. And we put together a Black Lives Matter PSA for the deaf, hard of hearing, and those with disabilities. So as you look here, here are some of the individuals that participated in the PSA. Here's some of the individuals that participated in it as well. It's a 60-second PSA. In my finding to be an ally or a good ally, I found out that ASL is the third largest language in America. I found out that 60,000 deaf individuals are in the United States and Canada as well. In addition to that, I found out that 1/3 to 1/2 of individuals who are pulled over or killed by police officers have a disability. And that was just alarming to me. Here's some of the script as well, where I use metaphors and phrases that had the potential of being content that would be absorbed and potentially could go viral. So when we use things like "you will not be muted," "we will speak truth to power," "we will not sit back and watch," "we will forge ahead with our voice to breathe," these are phrases that will connect with individuals out there. Also, from a press standpoint, all the organizations and individuals of like, it's important that we prepare our digital content is as much as possible so that individuals who are in print, magazine, television don't have to look or scram for your digital content. And then also with your digital content, always have a call to action. Individuals love videos, they love cute videos, but they also like to know what to do after they watch your digital content. And part of being an ally is being able to give them something to do after they watch or absorb your digital content. If that's volunteering, if that's getting more involved, if that's bringing awareness and things of that nature, we have to know what to do. And due to these calls to action, I'm going to share my other screen. Due to these calls to action, you have individuals that could potentially give you what it takes to go viral. So I'm going to show you the 59-second unspeakable PSA that has gone viral across the world. So what I found out is that the deaf, hard of hearing, and those with disabilities, they have a voice. And what's important to be an ally in a particular subject, you have to understand that we have to be an advocate. The word advocate comes from a Latin word called advocare. And advocare means to add a voice. We don't want to replace voices. We want to be allies that add and advocate onto a particular subject. We released Unspeakable July 15th, 2020. We got over 30,000 hits within the first 24 hours. We were featured in every major publication in Allegheny County. We were featured Forbes magazine. My daughter, 8 years old, who inspired this whole entire PSA, was featured on Good Morning America. We got those Nelson numbers. 1.6 million people watched that. And not only that, from the American standpoint, one of the largest networks in Tokyo, Japan, called Direct Talk, interviewed my daughter, 8-year-old daughter, who inspired this whole thing. And they broadcast over 60 countries, and their viewership is 300 million people around the world. So when we talk about digital and virtual content, now more than ever, it has the equity to change lives. So that's what it means to be an ally, to advocate for, a lot of causes. And we can't be scared anymore. We will not be muted. That will not be the phrase of 2020. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Amay. That was powerful. It's amazing. It's amazing. So thank you for sharing that. And I did share a link to the PSA in the chat. And so, we'll capture all those links and share them in our follow-up too, with all the panelists. But I would like to say, because I saw something come up in the chat asking if this webinar was closed caption, and I will tell everybody, we worked really hard. Taylor worked hard to make that happen. But there's such high demand for live closed captioning of virtual content right now that we could not secure the company that we were working with. But I will say that when this recording of the webinar comes out, it will have closed captioning along with it. So just keep that in mind. You'll be able to see the closed captioning when we release the recording. So next up, thank you again, Amay. Wonderful as always hearing from you. Wonderful. Our next expert is Adam Rigger, Director of Production for the Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for May. That was fantastic. This is a tough act for me to follow, especially being sort of the boring nuts and bolts guy. But, I think it's important because with the nuts and bolts and with sort of this foundation, you know, this is what's going to elevate these and uplift such important narratives. So, you know, and as you know, boring as cameras can sometimes be, at least, you know, they do serve a very important purpose. So let me share my slide deck here. So this is the live stream production, the nuts and bolts, and basically converting your performing arts venue to support live streamed performances. A little background on me and sort of where I'm coming from. So I'm the director of production here at the Annenberg Center, University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. We are a presenter and host of live performances and events, while often subcontracting our video streaming and simulcasting services. Theater, dance, concerts, event production, those were core competencies that we've always had. But video production was really limited to sort of in-venue projections as part of dance pieces or movie playback, et cetera. We hadn't really delved into live stream. Since the onset of COVID-19 and the gathering restrictions, it became pretty apparent very quickly that digital programming and a pivot to it was really going to be best to continue to engage our audience. This is all to say that I am not a trained video or live stream professional. I am a venue operations person and that learned some new tricks. So, you know, I wanted to make that kind of clear that some things I might say might be obvious to people that are trained in this, but this is really from the perspective of someone that's really had to pivot a relatively large organization to the field of digital. So, one thing that we've always had to discuss is sort of the nomenclature of live stream, and is it really live? You know, a lot of people that present live or digital streams, there are a number of ways of doing it. So live captured and stream content. So like what we're doing right here, where you guys can hear every and ah that I nervously project. There's a reason why I'm a behind the stage kind of guy. Or there is, you know, the captured and then streamed as playback, where you can cut all that stuff out. You know, the pros to this is that we're directly connected right now, even though we're in disparate locations across the state and country. We're here together. And there's an immediate engagement with artists and audience via chat, social media integration. You know, some of the cons of the live stream, and this could be a pro or a con really, is the artist's content needs to be tailored to the live stream format, especially for someone like us that are normally producing and presenting things that are designed for a stage. The translation to a screen can be, you know, a little bit different, and there's a lot of considerations to consider. Any mistakes like that one just there are very apparent. There's no fixing it in post like you can when you're editing something and making a polished product. You definitely need a robust encoding and live streaming platform. Also, as we just saw, that captioning can be difficult when it is live. It requires, you know, a dedicated resource to that. The pre-film stream, there's ability for multiple takes. The content can be trimmed and edited. It can be presented as if it's live. I know a lot of times, you know, live streams that are presented, the content was filmed, you know, earlier that day. I mean, even Saturday Night Live isn't actually live. So live can sort of take on a couple different meanings. Captioning is also easier when you're pre-filming it. And, you know, the cons of that are that there's not that direct immediate connection. And honestly, too much deliberation and production can temper the authenticity of a live performance. And I think, you know, especially for myself being in the background of live performing arts, that's something that, you know, you can't, or it's difficult to recreate digitally, is the feeling of being in a full room, all communally experiencing a piece of art together. So that's sort of a primer of, you know, what we're trying to consider as we're trying to take these what is a live performance and pushing it out to the web. Try to get through equipment and platforms pretty quickly here. So the sort of zoomed out version of what you're trying to do is you have a camera that's pretty self-explanatory. Processing, there's a lot of different steps that I sort of lumped in here. This is sort of a catch-all that we'll get into in just a moment. The encoding is taking your digital product and uploading it onto the web, and then the streaming platform is what's pushing your content out. You're going to notice from these couple slides that there are plenty of options for plenty of budgets for all of these levels. And I think that's really great about digital content, is that there is a relatively low barrier for entry. And you can really do this on free, and you can go all the way up through these, insane price points, and anything in between. So, in your lower price options, you can use your phone, you can use a tablet, a laptop, web cameras, all of these things will output to a live streaming platform. You have these. The middle tier option are things like Mevo, Mevo Plus, GoPro. I believe Microsoft makes a product. So these are sort of all-in-one audio, video cameras that will send signal to certain platforms. And then the next step up is, digital cameras, mirrorless cameras. These are the more higher end video components that you're going to get from a production company. When you're looking for a camera, consider your signal output. If you're going to do a wireless camera, make sure you have a robust internet connection. Gigabit is good. SDI cables are really good because they can transmit HD over long distances without signal boosting. They're essentially analog signals that are going to send HD signal, which is really helpful. HDMI is a lot good is better for shorter runs, or you can buy these boosters that are called HDMI over Cat6. It's another power source, another thing you have to power up, so can be a little bit difficult. The other thing to consider is your output resolution of your camera. 4K is obviously what is the new standard for recording, what's happening in filmmaking. At this moment, most live stream platforms right now are lower resolution, usually in the 1080. So depending on what you're looking to do, that could influence what your camera choice is. Other considerations really is, how's the camera going to perform in low light? I know doing a lot of theater and dance, the lighting is very sculptural. You're not blasting someone with lumens, constantly. So, you want to make sure a camera that can sort of capture these nuances. Digital or optical zooms are really important in terms of a digital zoom. As it zooms in, it basically becomes grainier. An optical zoom will not do that, since it just uses the lenses and optics of the camera. And then consider tripods and how you're mounting your camera. Make sure you get a fluid head tripod so the camera moves smoothly when you're panning it and tilting it. There's also gimbal mounts and steady cams so that you can do close-ups and, well, maybe not too close because of COVID, but close-ups and more interesting shots that way. And then jibs or cranes that can really get really dynamic shots, but maybe a higher level of entry in terms of pricing. The processing, again, there's plenty of options for plenty of budgets. You can do this to Facebook Live. You can do this to Instagram Live. We're doing this right now on Zoom. There's Skype. There's a piece of freeware that I'd like to, mention that we started using in the beginning of this, when we were sending cameras to artists' residences and recording and doing these sort of live streams from their houses, is a program called Open Broadcast Software, OBS. It's free, it's on a Mac and PC, and it's a pretty robust piece of broadcasting software for a zero price tag. One thing I will mention with it is that it's a lot more stable on a PC than it is on a Mac. That's one thing that we learned as we used it. And then there's hardware and software switcher options in terms of what you can, between switching between cameras and audio signals, stuff like that. Consider your monitoring needs. So who needs to see what where? And that's important because, on a live stage, yeah, you can have a feed of the stage going to the stage manager. You can have, monitors that you're listening to the playback, but is this an inline monitor? So are you receiving signal directly from the camera before it goes to the live stream platform, or do you getting a low resolution feed of what's actually happening on stage? I think both are different and applicable in different situations. So as you're designing what your product is, you should keep those in mind. Obviously, playback and graphics are a huge component, something that we don't have on live stages for the most part. And there's motion graphics, so sometimes graphics are playback. So considering that sort of part is it's a new thing if you're used to live performances. And then finally, the audio. Are you feeding audio from your cameras, or are you feeding it from your front of house console? Like, what are those monitoring needs? And, you know, sometimes what we've found is that it's better for your audio to come into your live stream computer on a separate interface. We had some stability issues with feeding console audio into a video interface that was really meant to take the audio with the camera signal. The encoding and processing and encoding can sort of blend together here. The encoding is really sort of what's taking the signal, processing, and putting it up onto the web. Some of the social media platforms do it for you: Facebook Live, Instagram Live. You're doing it through your phone. YouTube is I guess doesn't have an encoder, but depending on your device, there are hardware encoders, so you can get just a straight up piece of equipment that's all it does. You can also get a camera switcher or a broadcast switcher that has an encoder built in. Then there's also the software encoder. So if you have a studio or production suite, a lot of times like Livestream Studios, which is what we use here at the Annenberg Center, is an encoder, a software encoder built into a digital production suite. So you have a lot of different options there, and a lot of digital, I find, is you can get paralyzed by your options. In terms of what a control computer should be, it could be included with the processing, but honestly, there's just more room on this slide. Make sure you have as much RAM as humanly possible. We found that you know, the CPU usage on our live stream computer, it can spike, especially when you're doing different signals at the same time, picture in picture, and stuff like that. You know, it jumps up to when you have a separate audio interface. Also, you know, with the computer OSs, make sure you have a hardwired Ethernet connection, and as well as make sure you look for redundant streaming options so that you can hopefully not lose people once you have them watching. The streaming platform, again, there's plenty of options for plenty of budgets. Social media platforms, YouTube is, you know, are really actually great platforms to put it on. There's what you call, you know, freemium or a la carte services. An example of this is Eventive. And then there's the enterprise and OTT platforms like Vimeo and Brightcove, and those are going to be some of the more robust in terms of features. I mean, Eventive has the same features as such, but what's nice about Eventive is you sort of pay as you go, as opposed to buying into a full service with some of these other sort of enterprise platforms. And I think it's important to consider, where is it going and who is watching? You know, if you're doing something that needs to get out to everyone, you know, social media, embedding it on a public page is huge. Embedding something on a private page, if you're trying to monetize it and put it behind a paywall, a private page is a good first step. That's something that once you have a link, you can share it with your friends, and everybody can sort of sidestep the you know, paywall. And then single sign-on or SSO are really sort of where the paywall really, you know, comes into place and is most helpful. A lot of these platforms, you know, you want to consider your paywall and ticketing integration. So most of these platforms have pre-integrated ticketing for a percentage of the sales, so that's pretty standard. A downside to that is that they capture the email addresses and sort of the you know, patron information that you probably would rather have. And then ticketing platform integration is also possible, usually as a buy-up, and oftentimes what we've found is it's an API or database query based on your ticketing system, whether it's Tessitura or AudienceView or what have you. And then finally, the biggest step is security and digital rights management. You know, single sign-on is very basic security, but it doesn't stop people from recording what's on the screen, and it doesn't necessarily protect the digital rights of what you're presenting. So these are all sort of things just to consider as you're sort of designing your live stream system. Don't forget that you're probably in a venue already, so you have equipment there. And, you know, I know what we found is we didn't have the equipment that, you know, in order to make the live streams, but we had the equipment to make the live streams better. So, you know, make sure if you have a light plot and electrics, you know, design a rep plot or augment your existing rep plot to be more camera friendly. And by that, it's sort of like get the saturate colors that are usually so great in dance and theater. They're not helpful with a camera's white balance. So it's usually that backlight and cyc lighting are better opportunities for you to put flashes of color in there. Screen test your light looks with different camera shots. It's amazing the difference of a camera location and what it does to a light look. So, especially if you're not a digital native, I don't know if that's the right term, really sort of make sure to test what you're looking at, because it's amazing how different it can be. In your audio, use your front of house console to send a more refined audio mix to your live stream. You don't necessarily need to, use the microphones that are mounted on your cameras, especially if you're presenting a music artist or anything of that nature. You can essentially mix your audio like it were for a recording, and play it back through the web stream. And also for people that have massive sound designs in their theaters, your playback interfaces that you run, the Motus and Focusrites, and those are also input interfaces. So they're really helpful, we found, in terms of getting really clean audio signal into our streaming computers. Couple quick logistical considerations. Probably been talking for too long, but this has been interesting because, normally with a live performance, it's a little bit prescriptive from a production side of what we're going to do. So sort of thinking about who's going to do what and where. Audio especially, if you're not doing camera microphones, latency is such an issue. Make sure you test your audio and video sync before every live stream. It's one of the most persistent issues. When you're setting everything up, make sure your audio console and processing encoders all have this matching sample rates. We found that really jumbles things up if you're not paying, if that's not set to the same thing. And then in terms of, what is the nature of the audio, normally for a live performance, we take what's on stage and we pump it out through a front of house public address system and, some monitors on stage for the artists. But this is so much different. Are you playing back? Is a dancer dancing to music that they need to hear on stage? But at the same time, we're sending that same music and a delayed video signal to the live stream platform. Where is all of this stuff sort of coming in and out of this stream? And the pre-production and advanced process is going to be so much different. And this has been the biggest surprise for me in terms of working with different parts of my organization differently. It's the first time that I've had production go to marketing and say, hey, we need this stuff in order to do the show. So that's the stuff like on-screen graphics, logos, copy in terms of what's on the lower thirds of presenters and speakers, development, or, what's the language for this pitch in terms of, are we going to, ask for people's support during this webcast. So there's a lot of things that you'll work with the same colleagues in your organization, but in a much different capacity, which is, I think, really cool. Make a storyboard, what's happening on screen when and who is responsible for it in terms of title slide and, we're going to start shortly thing. Is that going to be up for 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Is it, it's a lot of nuts and bolts that you really need to figure out first, and, make sure that it is scripted and ready to go for when you do it. And then finally, your engagement, chat, and social media. So if you're embedding something with a chat, who's monitoring that? Who is responding to people? And then if you have a Q&A, who is feeding those questions from social media to your host or presenter? Of course, there's the last but not least, the COVID-19 considerations. This is why we're all here, right? And obviously this could be another webinar in and of itself. But if you have a reopening plan, look at the backstage procedures. I think that's a really great starting point. I know here at Penn, we had to really make sure we presented a health and safety plan for everyone to even get approval to go back in the building. So, consider, the physical distancing when you're setting up your venue, spreading out your cameras, giving the performers the room they need, especially if vocalists are involved. That's produces a lot of airborne particulate. Personal equipment like headsets that people have to wear. If you can, assign them one-to-one to people, and then equipment that has to be shared. Make sure you have disinfecting procedures, stuff like that. So, it's a lot to consider. Hopefully this was helpful. Like I said, this is something that we've learned new. here, and it's been quite an adventure, and we're still learning. But thank you for the opportunity to share what we've learned so far.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much, Adam. That was really, really great information. So I'm sure we'll have some questions in the chat and in the Q&A that come up. So excuse me. So now I'd like to turn the webinar over to Lanish Miller-White, Executive Director of Theater Philadelphia.
Thank you. Bring it up here. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lanish Miller-White. I'm the new Executive Director of Theater Philadelphia, which is an umbrella organization that markets theater in Philadelphia and promotes all the activity going on, connecting our artists and our organizations with audiences. So I am talking about marketing and monetizing virtual programs. So the very first thing is creating the demand. How do we get the digital content that we're putting out to be something that people are wanting to go to and going to, instead of a Netflix or instead of a Disney Plus or something like that? And so when it comes to creating demand, especially with monetizing, we need to set a price, which might seem like, of course, but right now I know we're all trying to be very sensitive to folks who have had financial hardship when it comes to the pandemic. And so a way that you can do this is define a price, set a price that is the price, and allow there to be a standard ticket price option available for audience members. And then also put in a pay what you can ticket price option. So what that does is for folks who are able to pay a $10 or $15 ticket price, they can purchase a ticket like they normally would for the event or for the program. And for those who can't, they have the option to go a little less. They can put in $5, they can put in $1, or they can put in $0 if they aren't able to pay. But continuing to have an actual ticket price set for things is important to have folks get in the mindset that this is content that is worth paying for. And it also helps you for reporting down the line because you're able to report on, how many discounted tickets you were able to give for a program if you're reporting for a grant or something like that. And so you have those numbers of how many folks were able to pay the full price and how much access you were able to provide with the discounted tickets. Another thing you can do is consider a subscription model. I don't know if anyone from Ballet X is on the call, but Ballet X has launched a subscription for streaming videos from their organization. And so what that also does is you're getting income, and then you're also, with a monthly subscription fee, you're able to, in these very uncertain times, count on some sort of revenue and be able to kind of project out revenue because you know how many subscribers you have at how many dollars each month. Another way to create the demand for the content is making it available only for a finite time. So as opposed to putting up, putting a video on YouTube and folks being able to get to it at any time, have either specific times when you're showing the content. So maybe you're doing a show and you are showing the same pre-recorded video, but you're showing it, at 8 o'clock Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the weekend. And so people can only engage with it at that live time, like they would a traditional program. Or if you are giving folks the option to be able to, pay, get the link to something and watch it at their leisure, still set a specific time frame. So maybe it's a month, maybe it's 2 weeks, but so that folks know that they can only access it for a finite amount of time, and that makes it more of a priority for them versus just, something that's up on your website that they can watch anytime, and then they might never get to watching it. So another important thing to do in your marketing materials is setting up the expectations for the audience in your marketing materials. And so that is duration. Let folks know how long the event is going to be. Because with the digital nature, it can be an hour, it can be 2 hours, and it's good to let folks know what that looks like as everyone, virtual programming isn't just new to us, virtual programming is also new to our audiences. Let them know if it's going to be live, if it's going to be pre-recorded, or a mix of both. So Adam was talking about the different ways that you can do this. And so let folks know if it's going to be an actual, live event that folks can engage with, or if it's going to be something that will just be pre-recorded, or if it's a mix of both. Is there going to be some pre-recorded content, but then also the availability for people to engage with an artist in a talk back or something like that? Is there a live chat feature? So we're all in this, we're in Zoom in a webinar format right now, so folks can chat along. And there are some organizations who I've seen who have put out content where there isn't a chat feature and there's only a Q&A, so you can only engage with the organization that's putting it on and not with other audience members. And then, is camera going to be on or off? So this is Zoom in the webinar format. And if you do an event in Zoom in the meetings format, then participants can have their cameras on if you'd like. And so that's also good too, just to set folks up for understanding if they, if they need to be prepared to be seen, if that's a part of the program, if you want audiences to be seen, letting them know what to expect going into the program is important so that they're comfortable enough to come. And so, don't forget your usual marketing mix. Everything that you were doing before, consider that part of what you can do now, even for virtual programs. So that can still be mail campaigns, of course, social media, email campaigns, promotional exchanges. So where that may have used to be, you do program stuffing with another organization, or you might, drop off postcards at another venue and things like that. What does it look like now to do that digitally? Can you do an email exchange with another organization? Can you do a social media exchange with another organization? Definitely take advantage of the listings websites for your industry and for your area. So for folks that are in Philly, of course, Philly Fun Guide is a great listing website. If you're in the Philadelphia area and doing theater, the Theater Philadelphia website is also a great place to put up listings. And we've currently waived our listing fees, so those are free right now for promoting theater productions. And as an alternative to a regular, if you usually are out giving postcards at coffee shops or at the let outs or other programs, consider doing posters or flyers or placards that have QR codes. As everyone is being cautious about what they're touching and how they're interacting with folks, this is a good way to be able to promote in a broad sense. So the picture that you see there is from Theater in the X's Juneteenth event, and these were just slabs of wood that QR code was put and pasted onto, and they were hung around the West Philadelphia area, which is where the company usually does their work. And now the QR code technology is really, really easy. Most people with a smartphone can just shoot the camera at it and the link will open. It used to be that you had to get a special app and things like that. Now using QR codes is really, really easy, and it's definitely a good way to handle contactless marketing. And so we're doing, you're putting out virtual content, you're putting out multimedia content, and so you should have some multimedia elements to your marketing. Use video, whether that is pieces of what you're going to present, or you can have artists do, a little 30-second spot talking about what will be a part of the piece. You can do just audio voiceover over images. You can create GIFs. And this really, like Adam was saying, this really can be, it doesn't have to be anything that is, a large budget. A general cell phone with a recording feature for audio, or a cell phone with the camera turned horizontal, can be enough to put together these little marketing spots that you can use. And so lastly, I'll share two tools that I really, really like. And so that is Canva, which is great for making images and GIFs. And it also, really any sizes. They have templates for any size, lots of different imagery, lots of different little elements you can put in. The basic one is free. You can also pay $10 a month to be able to get to premium images. And another thing I love is Wondershare from Laura, which is a really, really good, user-friendly video editing program. And they have different sounds and transitions. They have lower third options you can pick, all kinds of things to create videos. And it's $70, but it's $70 for life. Once you buy the software, it's there, you have it forever. And you can pay an additional $10 a month if you want any different elements. You might want some different things for holidays or something like that. But it's really, really good to put together short little pieces for marketing, or even if you're doing things like, a countdown in the beginning of your thing. So you have like a 3-minute countdown for when your program is going to begin, anything like that. And it's really, really user-friendly, and I think very cost-effective at $70 forever. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lanish. Lots of wonderful information. Again, I'm furiously taking notes of everybody, even though, just to let everybody know that we will share in the follow-up email with the recording, also the links that have been discussed and the presentation. So you'll have access to all of that information in the follow-up email. So now we're going to go to a discussion about, or 2 presentations about the legalities of creating and providing virtual content. So I'd like to turn, the floor over to Sandy Garfinkel.
Thank you. I want to thank the organizations for allowing us to speak to this great group today. We really appreciate it. Let's begin the slideshow. Thank you. So just to introduce myself, I'm the chair of the Data Security and Privacy Practice Group for Eckert Siemens in Pittsburgh. We're headquartered in Pittsburgh. We have offices in Harrisburg and Philadelphia and out of state as well. And I wanted to talk to you today about cybersecurity and privacy issues in the virtual artist context. So the first thing that I wanted to discuss with you is a very recent incident that occurred that is unusual in that it impacted almost exclusively nonprofits, including museums, arts organizations, schools, and universities. And this incident involved an entity called Blackbaud. Some of you may be familiar with this company. They've actually been around for a few decades, but they've recently transitioned into a high-tech cloud-based service. And what they do is provide information services for nonprofits and other similar organizations in terms of donor and fundraising information. And Blackbaud suffered a hack. Back in February, a cyber criminal got into Blackbaud's system and installed ransomware. So probably if you've read the paper in the past couple of years, you've heard the term ransomware. Ransomware historically, in recent history, has been a term used to describe a type of malware that gets into your system and has the function of locking away information from you. In the traditional cyber hack, the cyber criminal is out to steal information. When ransomware came along, it was this innovation of sorts among cyber criminals that just allowed them to lock your information away from you using encryption technology. And so that has been the case for a couple of years. So cyber criminals have used ransomware to attack people who really need their information quickly, like hospitals, for example. And then they demand ransom, as the name suggests, to give you the decryption key to unlock that malware and get back to your information. And that works with varying degrees of success. And sometimes people don't pay the ransom and they try to restore their own data, which can take a long time. So it's a really problematic tool. So Blackbaud was attacked with ransomware. When they discovered it, they brought in an outside cybersecurity firm, and they acted to kick out the cyber criminal from the system. But on the way out, the cyber criminal stole a huge backup file from Blackbaud, and the Blackbaud backup file contained a lot of information from Blackbaud's clients going back years and years in some cases about their donor and constituent databases. And that included a lot of sensitive types of information and some not so sensitive types of information. So for the most part, this was donors and constituents. In some cases, they included vendors. In the cases of school, it was students. but we had at risk things like their names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, their giving history in terms of donations. Sometimes the organizations that were clients of Blackbaud would scan donation checks into the system, and those were not encrypted. So there was a lot of touchy, sensitive data that was compromised in this incident. And hundreds and hundreds of Blackbaud's clients all over the country were affected. Our firm got about 20 of these cases alone of clients and organizations that were mostly nonprofits of one type or another that were impacted by this. Now, what was unfortunate was that Blackbaud, as the third-party vendor, did not have a duty under law to take on all the notification and response obligations that would normally legally flow from a breach. Because the information they stored was on behalf of other entities, their duty, legally and technically speaking, was to turn around and say to their clients, we had a breach, it affected your information. Now you go figure out what you have to do about it under the law. Now they coupled that with a lot of assurances that there likely weren't notification duties or other legal responsibilities because most of the information they regarded as sensitive was encrypted. That was a bit misleading. And when we took on these cases and investigated with our clients, we found a lot of pockets of data that Blackbaud didn't notify them about that were not encrypted and that were potentially exposed in this incident. And so what happened to our clients was they had to go through what information they knew to be on that stolen file from Blackbaud, figure out which of their donors, constituents, alumni, students, vendors, employees information was included. And in some cases, it was bank account numbers, social security numbers, and things that would trigger legal duties under the laws. And I keep referring to that. In the United States, breach response is controlled by state law, and now every state has a separate law about what you're supposed to do if you suffer a breach that impacts certain types of information. In most states, the basic types of information that are protected are people's bank account numbers, their credit and debit card numbers, their social security numbers, and their driver's license or state-issued ID. In other states, that's been expanded to include almost anything that can be used to identify an individual person. And I'm going to talk about that with regard to California a little later in this presentation. I've given you a lot of specifics about this incident. There's actually a lot more information to tell this entire story, but I think the lessons for this group are you're not proof. You're not protected from being victimized by a cyber criminal just because you're a nonprofit organization. They may be after your donors and constituents, and they may try to get to them through you or through a vendor that you use, that you share information with. And so, historically, our firm handles companies in the private sector in terms of helping them respond to breaches like this. But this was a massive, very recent 2020 incident that affected only nonprofits and organizations, some of whom, some of you in attendance might have actually been impacted by this or your organizations. And so the lesson is you're not safe. You should protect yourself. You should be careful in selecting your third-party vendors with whom you share sensitive information, and ask them what they do to protect that stuff so that your information that you entrust to them can't be gotten at by an outside unauthorized person. And finally, those of our clients that we represented for this incident that had cyber insurance, 100% of them were covered by this incident once they got past their deductible. So if they had any extraordinary costs associated with doing the response, they were covered for that. So if you don't have cyber insurance, it's always something I recommend whenever I speak about cybersecurity. Quickly, just want to touch on this issue COVID-19 has been, of course, a tremendous negative impact on most sectors of our society. But one notable exception is cyber criminals and cybercrime. This has been a bonanza for cyber criminals. They could not wait to take advantage of the fear, confusion, use of technology for remote access to your workplace, use of technology that may not be totally protected in a way that your workplace technology might be. And they could not wait to take advantage of these situations to have an explosion of cybercrime. The FBI and other industry watch organizations have all noted that there's been a huge uptick in hacking and malware attacks of all sorts during this crisis. And so it's very cynical, but this is the world we live in. In my practice, cyber criminals love opportunities to exploit fear and confusion. And so what we've been seeing is a surge in phishing attacks by email. A lot of times the cyber criminal is using fake credentials, pretending there's somebody who has important information about the pandemic, about treatments, about financial relief programs, et cetera, to get people to click on links that allow them into their systems. And once you click on a link or click on an attachment that releases malware, you're down a road that you don't want to be down. And so what we've been stressing with our clients during this period of upheaval is to the extent you're working remotely, to the extent your employees are working remotely, if they're using equipment they don't normally use, if they're in an environment they're not normally in, you want to stress to them that all your data security and privacy policies are still in effect, that they should pay attention to what they click on and don't click on, and be suspicious of emails that approach them with miraculous types of information about stimulus programs, financial relief, treatments, cures for COVID, et cetera. So just wanted to throw in that message because we're all in that boat, including the people in the audience. So I mentioned this before, there's a new wave in the United States that's starting to rise concerning privacy protections over personal data. And it really started in Europe. And some of you probably have heard of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which was enacted in Europe in 2018. And it was a revolution in terms of protecting personal privacy and personal information across the world. It was the most comprehensive law, and probably still is, in the world. And it basically treats your privacy like you have a fundamental right to it, as though it were something akin to like a First Amendment right here in the United States. And so all these new requirements for entities to collect information of Europeans suddenly blossomed into being. You had to make all these disclosures about what you're collecting, why, what you're going to use it for, whether you're going to share it with anybody. And there were restrictions on what you could do with that information. And it also gave individuals rights to contact companies and entities and say, you have my information and I want you to do something with it. I want you to delete it. I want you to change it. I want you to send it to a certain place. And under that law, the entities were required to respond to those requests and in most cases do what was asked. So it was a tremendous compliance burden on individuals, on entities that collect individual information from Europeans. And it also applies to the UK. So lo and behold, California responded to the advent of that law by passing a somewhat similar law that actually only came into effect this year. And it only applies right now to California residents. And so far, no other state has a law quite like this, but a lot of them are talking about passing it. So if you're an entity that does any business in California, including collecting personal information from Californians, this law may apply to you. There are some other hoops that have to be satisfied before we know whether it does or not. But if you are, for example, collecting patron information from Californians, if you're doing a virtual artistic presentation of some sort, and anybody in the country can attend, and you're selling tickets to Californians, among others, or you're collecting donations from Californians, among others, this law may apply to you. And what you need to be aware of is CCPA requires you to make front-end disclosures about what information you're collecting and why, and who you're going to share it with. And it forces you to give folks the right to instruct you not to sell their information if they don't want you to. And there's a particular way that choice is supposed to be presented. And there are, lots of other ins and outs about this law. It is probably the second most comprehensive privacy law in the world. And it's about to get potentially more complicated because they may already be amending it. There's something on the ballot this November to make it even more strict potentially. So just wanted to mention this and make you aware of it. A lot of companies and entities don't know what to do in terms of compliance with this law. And one of the most difficult features is that, like the European law, if somebody contacts your entity and says, you have my information, and asks you to delete it, in most cases, you have to find that information and delete it. And that's not necessarily so easy, depending on how your organization is set up to store information and where it resides. So just a heads up, something to be aware of, and something to watch to see if the states that you do business in or that you reside in start to adopt similar laws. And we are tracking a number of states that are looking at this right now. And the federal government has also hinted that it is looking at a nationwide consumer privacy law. So those are the points I wanted to hit on today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions in the format provided. Thanks very much.
Wonderful, wonderful, great information. Lots of things to think about. Thank you very much, Sandy. I'm sure we'll get lots of questions about your presentation. So next, I am going to turn the webinar over to Shane Valenzi.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Let me see. I don't know where there we go. Is that working? Is that sharing okay? No? How about this? How about now? Great. Okay. I'm here. Thanks for having me, everybody. I am I'm an associate at Eckert Siemens. Before I went to law school, I was a stage director. So my examples today, when they come up, a lot of them will probably be theater related, but I'll try to expand as much as possible. Here today to talk about intellectual property law with respect to arts organizations, specifically those that are going to be implicated for those like really all arts organizations that are having to quickly pivot to streaming, and what's implicated by that kind of new presentation format. You have my name, you have my email, you have my phone number right there. If anything you're interested in isn't covered by the presentation today, please feel free to reach out. Helping arts organizations with IP issues is like most of the reason I went to law school. So with that said, let's get to it. So most of this presentation is going to be about copyright because copyright is the type of intellectual property that is most relevant to arts organizations in terms of their presentations. I will briefly go over what the other kinds of intellectual property are and really why they probably don't apply, but I'll do that at the end. So What is a copyright? This is, if you want to impress all of your friends with your legal knowledge at your virtual cocktail parties, you can give them this phrase: an original work of authorship fixed in a tangible medium of expression for a period of more than transitory duration. That is the most legalese you're going to hear out of me today. That's all you have to know. That's what a copyright means. What the heck is that? It doesn't really matter. This whole fixed in a tangible medium of expression, basically it just means it has to be something that's a physical something. In other words, something that can be deposited with the Library of Congress. That's really what matters, because the point of copyright law is to develop a repository of creative content for posterity. And if you can't deposit it with the Library of Congress, it can't be copyrighted. That's where that comes from. The other stuff, it's kind of from public policy. It has to do with, you know, the actual mechanical getting an image from a camera in a TV studio to somebody's TV screen involved in having to physically go through cable wires. Is that a copy? Well, yeah, technically it is, but we'll figure out a way so that it's not going to hold up innovation. That's where that comes from. We don't really have to worry about that today. What is copyrightable? Well, it's lots of stuff you would assume. So books, songs, plays, pictures, photographs, sculptures, movies, recordings, combinations of those things, you know, mashups, those kind of things. What is not copyrightable? Ideas, right? So this is the first kind of popular misconception, right? Copyright doesn't protect an idea. If you would come to me and you say, how do I copyright this idea? I'll say you can't. You copyright an expression of an idea. So you can't copyright an idea, but you do copyright how you express it. You can't copyright ideas. You can't copyright processes, formulas. You can't copyright words or phrases or symbols. If you want to protect a word or a phrase or a symbol, you do that through trademark law. There is something called the merger doctrine. That means that if the expression of an idea, if there's only so many ways you can express an idea, then you can't copyright those expressions, because then that would kind of subsume the whole idea in the first place. An example of that, in a sort of related concept, is the Senza-Fair doctrine. So if you cannot copyright like the bad guy tying up a heroine to the railroad tracks and the hero coming to rescue her. You can't copyright that. That's an old trope that gets used all the time, and so you can't protect that as an example. Who owns it? A person can own a copyright. A corporation can own a copyright. You'll find that most of the time the corporations own copyrights. Whether an individual is creating a piece of work for an organization, who actually owns that work is going to depend on two things. One, it's going to depend on the actual contract between that person and the organization. But what's in that contract is generally going to be driven by the norms of the creative industry. And every industry is different as far as the norms of who's going to own what in terms of the finished product. So as an example, in the theater industry, the playwright's king, right? The playwright is going to own the intellectual property rights to the play. The producer may or may not negotiate to own, to own certain, the right to exploit certain of those works, first class rights, things like that. But the actors aren't going to have any rights. The director, to the extent that he or she has intellectual property rights in their contribution, are probably not going to own that going forward. If anybody involved in that creative process wants any ownership of their rights going forward, they're going to have to negotiate to be considered a co-author on the project. So playwright's king in the theater world. Conversely, in the film industry, the screenwriter is almost never going to own any part of the finished product. That's going to be the film studio, and sometimes even the director. But in the film industry, a screenwriter is just a hired gun, the same way the actors are. And so it just kind of depends on your industry and the norms of the industry. Generally speaking, and this is relevant to streaming content, performers do not have copyright protection by and large right now. Now, there is something called the Beijing Treaty on performers' rights in the audiovisual space that was signed in 2012, and that was that basically says that we commit that we're going to around the world create individual system of laws in our country that awards performers some level of protection or rights in audiovisual work that is streamed online. And the idea behind that is, you're a sitcom actor, your sitcom goes into syndication, you get a check in the mail for like 34 cents every time that episode you were on gets played. And it's usually like a check that's less than the postage cost. But you get it, you get a check. But you don't get a check if that same episode, is streamed on Netflix. And so this is what the Beijing Treaty was a big part of what it was designed to protect. All that said, it just went into effect in this past April, and the United States has not enacted any laws to bring itself in compliance with the treaty. The last time there was an international copyright treaty that went into effect, it took the United States over 100 years to actually get around to putting in place any laws that complied with it. So I wouldn't hold your breath, but this is a space to watch. What does a copyright protect? You have 6 rights that a copyright protects. It protects the right to reproduce it, to make copies, hence the name, to make derivative work. So you want to make a play from this book, you want to make a movie from this play, you want to make a video, like a music video is technically a derivative work. It protects the right to distribute, to sell the copies that you make. It protects the right to publicly perform the work if it's a work that you can publicly perform. So if it's a book or a play or a song or a dance, you have the right to publicly perform that work, or a movie as well. There's also a separate right to publicly perform a sound recording. This is very specific to online, and it only applies if you're only streaming the song itself, so there's no video attached. That's like if you're using a Pandora or a Spotify, something like that. If there's a video attached, that's completely separate, which we'll talk about briefly. And public display is kind of the same thing as public perform, but it's for things that can't be performed. So that's like pictures or photographs. So if you're broadcasting a picture to everybody, then you're probably publicly displaying the work. If you are operating a gallery and you're curating, you're talking about what the picture is and taking everybody on a tour, you are probably both publicly displaying the works, and you're probably creating a derivative work because you're making a video that includes the pictures. It's important to understand that what a copyright is doing is it's giving you, as the author, a bundle of rights that you then have the right to exploit, to license, to allow others to use, and to exclude anyone from using who doesn't get your permission. How long does copyright last? For friggin' ever. Anything created before 1923 is in the public domain. Basically, everything after that, if it is of any commercial value at all, is probably protected for 95 years. Because if it's any commercial value and it's that old, it's almost certainly owned by a corporation like Disney. anything created after the Copyright Act was amended in 1978 is protected for the life of the author plus 70 years if the author is a person, or for 95 years from publication if the author is a corporation. Now, if you had asked me 3 years ago, I would have told you that it is virtually certain that this would have been extended in 2018, because last time copyright stuff was about to come into the public domain was at the end of the 90s, and Congress extended it by 20 years because they were lobbied by Disney, who didn't want Mickey Mouse to enter into the public domain. So it was extended by 20 years. I assumed they would do that again because nothing had gone into the public domain for like almost 100 years. But as it turns out, maybe the only positive outcome of congressional deadlock is that there really was no momentum to extend the copyright law anymore. Nobody really cared. So 2018 came and went, and stuff is starting to go into the public domain again. Now, come see me in 12 years when Snow White enters the public domain, and we'll see if it's been extended before then. But for now, stuff is very slowly starting to re-enter the public domain. But anything that's created in our lifetimes probably will not enter the public domain in our lifetimes. Now, here's something everybody wants to know. How do you get a copyright? So first, we're going to go back to our magical phrase. We're going to create an original work of authorship fixed in a tangible medium of expression for a period of more than transitory duration. Step 2 is, there is no step 2. You're done. You have a copyright. All you have to do is create the work. Once once you've created a product that is fixed in a tangible medium of expression, it is copyrighted, period. You don't have to do anything else. That said, it used to be you would have to put a little copyright symbol on it. And a lot of times you'll still see that little copyright symbol. It doesn't actually mean anything. You don't have to put that on there on anything. It doesn't actually have any legal significance. You can do it. It gives people notice that your thing is copyrighted, but you don't have to. You probably should register your copyright with the U.S. Copyright Office if you're planning on exploiting the work. And it's not because you have to, it's not because you can't later, it's because if you want to sue somebody for infringing on it, you have to register your copyright first. And if you want to get statutory damages, which is like 6 figures of damages, which is probably more than what a lot of copyrights are worth, you're going to have registered it before the infringement. One note, the Copyright Office is not like the Patent Office. They're not going to review a piece of art to make sure that it's copyrightable. It's just a repository. So to the extent that there's any review done, it's going to be to make sure you fill the forms out right. But you're not going to, you don't have to, there's no substantive hurdles you have to jump through to get registered. So there's lots of honestly, there's lots of crap registered as copyrights that is not copyrightable that would never hold up to a challenge. They're just signing the form. That's all they're doing. And it's really cheap. It's like $35 maybe last time I checked. I mean, it's maybe a little bit more now, but it's not cost prohibitive. Really all you have to do is fill out the forms right and deposit 2 copies of the work with the Library of Congress. Real quick, because I expect we're going to come back to this in the Q&A portion, I do want to touch on music copyright just for a second, and that's because music copyright is really freaking complicated. So most things have one copyright attached to them. Music copyright has more than one copyright attached to it at any given time. So any song, I picked Shaboom because I have a 2-year-old daughter who loves doo-wop currently. Any recording of a song, any single, has 2 different copyrights that are attached to it. There's a copyright in the music composition itself, so the actual song, the melody, the lyrics, etc. That's owned by the author, and the author here is the composer and the lyricist. And typically, that will be assigned to the publisher, the music publisher of that song. There is a completely separate other copyright in the sound recording itself. Now, and those are called that's called the master right. Typically, that would be, I think technically it may originate in the performer, but for all intents and purposes, that is always owned by the record label who recorded the song. So, if you would like to use a recorded song in something that you're streaming online, you have to obtain 3 different licenses. You have to obtain the master use license to use that particular recording. And to get that, you have to go directly to the record label. You have to get what's called a sync license, synchronization license, and that is a license to put that music along with some sort of visual content, whether it's a slideshow or a guy talking, or a dancer dancing, or whatever it is. If there's some visual element, you have to get a sync license to match the music to whatever it is you're showing in the video. Now that you get from the music publisher. The third kind of license is a public performance license, and that is to perform the work publicly, and streaming something counts as performing the work publicly. Now, getting this license is probably easier than the other two, because virtually every song is going to be administered. The public performing rights are going to be administered by what are called performing rights organizations. That's ASCAP, BMI, CSAC. There's these specific organizations, and they're just operate as clearinghouses to grant public performance licenses. If you are streaming on a social media platform like YouTube or Facebook, you're not going to have to worry about this particular license, because YouTube and Facebook and any social media platform of any repute already has blanket public performance licenses with all of the major PROs. So you're almost certainly not going to have to worry about that. If you're using a different site, you're just going to have to ask either I don't know off the top of my head, like whether Vimeo has a blanket license agreement with ASCAP or not. You could ask Vimeo. You're probably have better luck just asking ASCAP. They're usually the PROs are usually pretty easy to talk to. They're used to dealing with people, with non-lawyers, with just people. They're used to dealing with like bar owners who need to get an ASCAP blanket license to play the jukebox in their bars. Like that's who they're used to dealing with. So they're usually pretty accessible. And they can also sometimes provide good guidance in terms of how to get sync licenses. They can tell you who to contact. In terms of figuring out who to get in touch with, a couple of different places you can check. You can start with the PROs, with the ASCAPs or the BMIs. You could also look up, and I don't have a slide on this, you might just want to write it down, the Harry Fox Agency, HARRYFOX. Harry Fox administers mechanical licenses, which some of you may have heard of. You don't have to worry about mechanical licenses for the purposes of this presentation, or for the purposes of probably what most of you are doing. Those only apply if you're only producing sound, if there's no video involved. But one of the things that Harry Fox does is they can help you kind of track down authors to get sync licenses and other things like that. You can also look at the Copyright Office. The Copyright Office has a publicly available searchable database, so whoever the author is should be there. You can often find it that way. Now, I will say that if the idea of contacting a record label to get a master use license sounds daunting, it's because it is daunting. It can be very difficult and usually cost prohibitive. If you want to use a Beatles song in, over your streaming presentation, you can't afford it. I'm not sure what your budget is, but you can't afford it. I promise you can't afford it. Even if you thought you could, you can't. It's like going to be way more expensive than you want to pay, I promise. And most songs that anyone's heard of, or recordings anyone's heard of, are going to probably be cost prohibitive to what you want to spend. You're better off doing something either original or relatively unknown. It's just a big pain in the butt to use to obtain master rights of just about everything, especially if something's old. A lot of times the record label is defunct and nobody knows how to get in contact with them. That is why you cannot find Happy Days DVDs anywhere, is because a lot of like the old songs in those episodes were cut by record labels that no longer exist, and so they are what's called orphan works. There is nobody who can give anyone permission to use those songs, and so therefore anything that uses those songs is just kind of sitting there until this copyright expires. So that's another difficulty you might face. So let's say you're bad and you infringe. What is an infringement? So you have a valid copyright that was registered. You do one of those 6 exclusive rights without permission of the author. And there's similarity. These legal terms, I'm gonna skip ahead of these. Basically, if you're using something that you know isn't yours, that you didn't create, you're probably infringing, unless it's a fair use, which we will talk about next. Fair use. You see that picture of Mickey Mouse right there? I dare Disney to sue me over it, because this is an educational presentation, and therefore it is not infringement. Fair use means if you transform, recast, or adapt a copyrightable work such that it is not infringement. So fair use isn't a defense to infringement. If something is fair use, it means you're not infringing at all. Examples of fair use: criticism, commentary, factual reporting, teaching, educational use, scholarship or research. These are examples of fair use. There are 4 factors that go into whether something is fair use. And before I do this, I need to say that if you were to ask me what is the single biggest misconception people have about copyright law, I would tell you by far it is this urban myth that there is some amount of a work you can use that's before it becomes infringement. That is not true. It's not like, well, how much of the song can I use before while it's still fair use? That's not a thing. It's not true you can use 5 seconds of something, or 3 seconds, or 10 seconds. It's just not true. It depends on the individual work and what you're doing with it. So these 4 factors. There's the purpose and character of the allegedly infringing work. So are you using it commercially, or are you using it for nonprofit use? There's the nature of the work. Is the work, is it fact or fiction? Is it, are you reporting a news story, or are you making another creative work? Amount and substantiality. This is where people think, well, it depends how much of it I'm using, right? So if I just use a little bit, it's probably fine. It's only if I use a lot of it that's a problem, right? Not necessarily. So the seminal case on this, it's called the Heart of the Work case. So in the 70s, Gerald Ford published an autobiography. And one of the big newspapers, I want to say it might have been the LA Times, it might have been the Washington Post, I don't really remember which, published a book review of Gerald Ford's autobiography. And the book review was not a normal book review, and it published a little excerpt, which isn't unusual in a book review. It only published 1 paragraph from this 400-page book, less than 1/10 of 1% of this book. But the paragraph was the paragraph where Gerald Ford explained why he pardoned Nixon. And the publishers successfully sued for copyright infringement and successfully argued that the only reason anybody would read Gerald Ford's autobiography would be to find out why he pardoned Nixon. Nobody cares about anything else in it. And the jury agreed and found that it was infringement. So even if you just use a very tiny bit, if it's the heart of the work, it's still infringement. You're not going to be able to get around fair use. And lastly, market harm. How much is this harming the market for the original work? This used to be the most important factor. It very much is not anymore. And that somewhat coincides with how popular social media is. Putting something on YouTube that isn't yours, you're not making any money from it, but it is still infringement. I don't want to get bogged down too much here. I can address these in the user questions, but assuming anybody is interested, feel free to ask this in the Q&A. But what happens when somebody accuses you of infringing on something you put online? There is a very specific procedure. It is called DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act Takedown Procedure. It's a notice. So like they'll send the site a notice. The site will take the video down. They'll notify you. You can file a counter notice saying, no, I have a right to do this. And then they can either sue you or the video goes back up. It's definitely raises the stakes. However, one thing I do want to draw everyone's attention to is that on sites like YouTube or Facebook, a lot of this is done on their end will be done. There's like these digital algorithms. So if you do happen to get the master rights to a sound recording, and you put that in your video, and that video then goes up on YouTube, it is very possible, even likely, that the algorithm will flag that as a copyright violation, because all it's doing is searching for something that's in its registry of songs, and it'll take it down and automatically just send you a notice, and you have to dispute the claim, and then it's either the rights holder can release the claim or uphold the claim. You can appeal. If you appeal, then they either release the claim or it goes into this DMC flowchart. But I know it gets a little complicated, but long and short of it is there's a lot of complaint response before you ever get anywhere near a lawsuit when you put something up on the internet that may be copyrighted. Here's what we didn't talk about today. We didn't talk about trademark because trademark protects brands. It does not protect art. Trademark comes from the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, not the IP clause. So this is trademark protection: names, titles, logos. Unless you are using somebody else's name or title or their logo or something like that and trying to make money from it, or trying to create some confusion as to who's actually sponsoring or creating the work, trademark's not likely to be implicated. The only, I would say the most likely time this might come up for arts organizations generally is when you sell merchandise. You want to make sure whatever is on the merchandise isn't somebody else's trademark. Patents are involved. That's scientific inventions. That's nothing that is implicated here. The publicity rights are interesting. Now, when I say publicity rights, I'm not talking about the same kind of publicity that Sandy was talking about. So I'm not talking about people's data. I'm talking about people's images, an actual picture of you. Publicity rights are based on state, not federal law, so every state is different. In Pennsylvania, though, publicity rights do not apply to expressive works. And it's a very technical definition of expressive works, but it basically encompasses anything anybody in this webinar today would possibly want to do is an expressive work. So publicity rights are unlikely. So, you know, if there's somebody in your video that you are streaming, it is unlikely that they have a publicity right that is being exploited by you improperly. That said, I would never discourage anybody from getting a waiver from anybody who's going to appear in a video. I would just get them to sign something that says, to the extent I have any publicity rights, you know, you have permission to use my image, etc. So I know there's a ton we didn't cover. There's probably lots of really relevant stuff you guys have questions about. If we don't address it today, again, here's my email and phone number, and feel free to reach out, and I will flip it back over for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Shane. Again, lots of great information. So now we are going to head into the Q&A section of the webinar. I've seen a lot of questions come in through the chat, and we had a number of pre-submitted questions. We have about a little bit under 20 minutes left. Dawn and I, we tried to gauge the time, but the content was so incredible and so all-encompassing. I'm really happy. So I'm going to turn it over now to wonderful, amazing Dawn Frisbee Byers, Senior Director of Content Engagement for the Humanities Council, and she is going to be the moderator for the question and answer session.
First of all, I want to thank all of the panelists. As I'm listening and jotting down questions, I am learning as well. So thank you for all this great information. And for the people on the call, I just want, before we run out of time and before people have to jump off, I want to repeat, please let us know either in the chat or via email other topics that you would like for us to put a webinar together, because Sarah and I have decided that we're just going to keep doing this as long as we're all on via Zoom. So thank you, everyone. There were tons and tons of questions, so I'm going to try and get some of them. And the first one actually was one of the last questions that just came up. And you know what? I don't know. Shane, this is for you. When we were talking about copywriting, things like this webinar, is this copyrighted?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. Short answer. Okay, I'm gonna stick with Shane for one other second because a lot of information came up about music and copyright. You answered a lot of the questions, but I just want to be clear and for everyone that there are exceptions for music copyright if it is used for educational purposes. Did I hear that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay.
Education, anything that's used for educational purposes is a kind of textbook, no pun intended, definition of fair use. That does not mean, however, but all that means, and I want to make this distinction. If something is fair use, and you feel very confident that it's fair use, that means that if you get sued, and after you go through an entire lawsuit and then go to trial and have a jury, after 2 weeks of a jury trial, you have a really good chance of winning.
Okay, wow.
You know,
Okay.
so, but do you really want to, it's expensive to get there. And so it can be dangerous to just rely on, well, this is almost certainly fair use, so I'm just gonna use it. That can be very dangerous. I always advise checking with the rights holders first. If you think there's any chance that the rights holders, you know, if it's going to be a big enough presentation with a wide enough reach that the rights holders, you know, could catch wind of it. I would also say there are those of you who are looking for content to use for educational purposes. I would just Google open educational resources. This is creative content that has been specifically cleared for educational use. Without worrying about getting sued down the line. So that would be, I would just pop that into Google and see what comes up.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to switch over to marketing and monetization. So Lanish, one question that came up that I've been thinking about as well. One of the advantages of doing virtual content is that you are no longer have any barriers for geographic barriers. So whereas if you are a theater in Philadelphia and you're promoting a show, you really wouldn't promote it to Pittsburgh or any other part, or Erie, Pennsylvania, because no one's driving 5 hours. I don't care how good the show is. It's likely that they're not going to drive in. But now that you have the opportunity to market that there is no geographic barriers, what kind of tips or ideas does it come to when you marketing beyond your geographic barriers?
A really good thing to do would be to connect with kind of your equivalent in other regions or even, you know, around the world. I mean, if you are looking at some sort of programming and you're presenting a certain artist, like consider either asking that artist who else they might be working with and connecting with them and sharing that way. Like definitely finding folks who have like audiences to you. And I think someone mentioned earlier in the chat too, like even for all of us now, like you said, like we're all in the same state. So that's a commonality as it is. And now we do have the opportunity to cross promote each other's work in a way that we couldn't before because, you know, the distance would have been prohibitive. So finding folks either regionally that have similar audiences to you, or even across the nation who might be doing similar work, and arranging for some sort of either cross promotion or even doing programming together, because that's a thing that we can do now also. So what does it look like to, you know, have a 3-part series and each part is hosted by a different organization or something like that?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Adam, I'm going to come over to you for a production question. I have 2. Somebody asked about redundant streaming options and wasn't sure of what you meant. You mentioned that in your presentation.
Sure. I'm going to possibly highlight how ignorant I am on this. I mean, essentially, really, it's just the computer outputting to 2 separate internet connections in the event you lose connectivity on one that you're hopefully still streaming to the platform. There's a lot of intricacies that I actually don't know, but that's essentially I mean, we do it with almost anything else. You know, you have a really important performer, you usually put 2 body mics on them. You know, nowadays sound systems, audio, Dante network is all about redundancy. So it's just about backing up what you have so you don't lose people midstream.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Sandy? I know I'm jumping all around, but I am trying to get some of these questions answered. Sandy, somebody asked, is there a recommended length of time that you should keep your patrons' info? And what happens if you destroy info that you have from patrons and you have to prove that you had their permission to have it or use it? And forgive my lack of legal language.
No, that's perfect. A very clear, 2 good questions. Here's what I recommend. In terms of how long you hold on to personal information of patrons or others, you should make it a rule, and this is what they call data security hygiene. You should make it a rule among your other policies about treatment of information that you only hold on to personal information for as long as you need it. In fact, the European law I mentioned during my presentation makes it an affirmative duty for everyone to get rid of information they no longer have a legitimate use for, because it just becomes a target for theft or loss. And so part of the rights that they're giving people over their information is that those who have it will be so safe with it that they'll get rid of it if they don't need it. Now, there are exceptions for when you need it for a legitimate business or legal purpose. So, for example, if somebody's charged a credit card to your organization and then a dispute comes in, or somebody questions the charge, and then that person calls you and says, I want you to delete all my information about my credit card, you can say, I can't do that yet because I need the information to prove that this was a legitimate charge. So I'm not going to do it now, but I'll do it when I no longer have a legal or business need for this information. So that's generally how you should treat it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Adam, I'm going to go back to you for a quick second. When we talk about low barrier for entry for equipment purposes, you know, I know this is an impossible question to answer, so I apologize in advance for putting you on the spot. But what do you think minimum from a cost perspective? And I know it ranges from, you know, you could spend $1 million on equipment, but what do you think minimum that an organization would need to spend if they wanted to do a live stream that looked decent, that looked good enough for somebody to pay to pay for it? Is that like can they do it for 10 grand? Can they do it for less? I just don't have a sense of what low barrier for entry. How low is the low?
Sure. I mean, I think it also depends on the nature of what's being presented. You know, if you want multiple camera angles and camera shots, that's going to increase the barrier for entry. You know, even what you're presenting, I think, you know, a musical artist is probably more difficult than, say, a dance performance or a theater piece. So I think there's different tiers there. I mean, yeah, the cheapest and cheerful route is your cell phone straight to a social media network, and then from there it really just kind of goes up with what's important to you and what's important to the work you're trying to put out there. I'm sorry, it's sort of a non-answer in a way. I mean, I think $10,000 is definitely that's, you know, several very decent cameras, a video switcher, a hardware encoder. So there's definitely, you know, I would think you could probably even do it for less, even half that. You know, it's really gonna, but, you know, and then I guess the biggest issue really is your platform. That's going to be one of the bigger issues, especially if you are truly looking to monetize it. That's what's going to you're going to pay a premium for single sign-on and that sort of ticketing integration. But yeah, I mean, I think it really does run the gambit, and so hopefully it's somewhat of a helpful answer.
No, it's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you. I have a question, and Shane, you might have covered this, but when I'm on Facebook and I have a friend that posts something and they type in the message, they say, I do not have the rights to this music, or I do not have the rights to this. Are they just covering themselves? Does that mean anything? Like, they can still be sued because they don't have the rights, or just admitting it up front? But does that have any meaning whatsoever?
No. It means absolutely nothing. It won't help you. It doesn't. It's like going into a jousting match with like a paper gown. Like, it doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. There's so many more other questions. Are there any, listening to the other panelists, I'm going to actually give the panelists the chance to ask your fellow panelists any questions that you may have, or Sarah, that might have come up in the chat that I missed. But is there anything that you guys want to know from each other?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I have a question for Adam, actually. So I'm a Penn theater grad, so I know the Annenberg Center like inside and out. Do you find it? I assume that are there different problems in the different state theaters? So, like, the Zellerbach is massive, and then the Prince is medium, and then the Monty is tiny. Have you moved any presenters to the different theater spaces to accommodate for streaming better, or do you just make the best of each space?
It's funny you asked that, because I mean, for everyone that's not familiar with our building, the Prince Theater, which is the medium-sized space, was originally a TV studio in 1971 when this building opened. We have been using it primarily as a theater, but that is our main streaming space, although right now we are setting up for a live stream in the Zell, which will happen tomorrow. So I think it's really more about how the work is going to be showcased the best. You know, we have a jazz duo coming up, and I think they'll just be dwarfed on the Zellerbach stage. But we have a dance ensemble from New York City, Pam Tanowitz Dance, tomorrow, and that their work is just more, you know, will be much more effective in that venue. So I think we asked that question of what venue suits the work the best, I think.
I have one more question if no one else has one. I think, Lanish, you'll probably be the one to answer, but I really would like to hear from anyone. You know, the change in dynamics, I mean, we're seeing it in sports as well, without a live audience. I know we're here to talk about virtual programming and making it available online, but from a virtual production standpoint, how have you seen that the change without the audience dynamic, and is there anything that you can do to make it more engaging for the artist who's used to performing in front of live bodies and not empty seats?
Yeah, I really, really recommend, if you can and it's feasible for your program. Like, I like to, if I'm using Zoom, I really like to use the meeting format so that if audience wants to, they can have their camera on. And I've seen like some really, really fun interaction happen because, you know, it's a positive thing in that the artist and the audience can get a lot closer than they normally would be able to be like in a venue if it was, you know, like after the curtain or something like that. Being able to, especially for things like artist talks, like in those conversations, it's really nice for everyone to have their camera on. And the audience is feeling like they're talking directly to this person who maybe they wouldn't have had the courage to go up to and talk to, you know, at an actual event. So I really like the like meeting format where everyone has their camera on. And so you can, you know, as the moderator, you can, you know, have the screen on them when they're doing like their performances or their talk, and then allowing for everyone to see each other, to interact with each other. So it's not just a chat is a really nice thing. And then also something that is all, if you have pre-recorded theater, and you're presenting it in a format, like if you're putting it on Zoom with the chat function or Facebook Live or YouTube, a thing that like I didn't even realize was going to be cool was that the capacity for artists to chat along with the audience during the program, which of course you could never do in actual time because they would be on stage.
Right.
And so the first time that I did a Facebook Live event and the whole, you know, the cast and I were chatting along with the audience, it was a really unique experience because now we're viewing it with them, we're getting able to interact with them, and you know, and it was really nice. So there are some advantages to being
perception that the audience would never have the opportunity.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. Okay, great. It is 11:59, and I am very, very cautious of and conscious of everyone's time. Sarah, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close out and to say that questions that we didn't get to. How do you want to handle
I just want to thank all of our wonderful panelists. The content, like I said earlier, I was taking copious notes, lots of great information. I know y'all worked hard to cover the pre-submitted questions in your presentations, and just so much to think about. I think a lot of people will have more questions going forward. I've seen some chat saying we could do separate webinars about all of your presentations. So, but just thank you. I know everybody has very busy schedules, and so the fact that the panelists would take their time to share their expertise and the registrants would take their time to sit and try to absorb all this information. And just to let you know, I know Taylor's put it in the chat too. We will share the recording. We will share the links, all the relevant information that's been shared today. And feel free, I'll also follow up with my email. So if you have any other questions for us, I'll collect those. And if you didn't get a chance to put, thank you, Taylor. If you didn't get a chance to put, kind of recommend your theme for the next webinar, please feel free to email us and let us know what you think. Dawn and I are really eager to hear so we can start planning the next event. But thank you all and have a wonderful day and rest of your week, and stay happy and healthy and safe. And thank you, PHC, for all of this collaboration. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Sarah?